Good evening, and welcome back to Corvid Crunchies, the series where I teach you how to make various foods that have been on my mind lately. So, has the summer heat been getting you down? Do you need a way to cool off? Well, today have I got the recipe for you. We're covering how to make custard-style ice cream, which is the sort of stuff you'll find in those expensive premium ice cream pints you'll see at the grocery store. Now, unlike previous recipes, this one is actually a bit of a creation of my own. However, I cannot fully claim credit for it as it was based on a recipe that came with my ice cream maker. Speaking of, a couple of little warnings before we begin. This recipe can probably be made in most ice cream makers, but the times may vary depending on your individual machine. For example, the one that we have here in the Corvid Communications office is the Cuisinart Frozen Yogurt Ice Cream and Sorbet Maker, which Mrs. Cawthorn found secondhand in Facebook Marketplace. And trust me when I say we have gotten our money's worth out of that. So, if this specific model is not your ice cream maker, please refer to the manual for your machine so you can properly make ice cream on your specific device. So, next up we're going to go over the common allergens in this dish. Though, be sure you are aware of your allergies if you have a less common allergy. So please be mindful of that. So obviously, given that this is an ice cream, this contains dairy. Fun fact, you actually cannot legally call something ice cream in the United States unless it contains a certain amount of milk, fat, and solids. I don't know the exact percentages off the top of my head, but I find it interesting that there's a legal definition for it. Also, there is one more common allergen this recipe contains that you may not be aware of. This recipe also contains eggs, and the egg is why it's considered a custard-style ice cream, because you need eggs to make a custard, and we will be making a custard in this ice cream. So, as usual, we'll go over the recipe with a little demonstration, and then I will give my thoughts. So, let's go ahead and get started with this. So, this recipe calls for the following ingredients: 2 cups whole milk, 2 cups heavy cream, a half cup granulated sugar, a half cup brown sugar. The recipe strictly calls for a cup granulated sugar, but I swapped half of it for brown because I like the flavor that it adds. It will make a vanilla ice cream taste like a creme brulee. It is fantastic. Anyway, we also need 2.5 teaspoons vanilla extract and 5 large egg yolks. If you're not dealing with large eggs, you may want to add a couple more just for good measure, to make sure that you have the proper amount of yolk. Anyway, all of these ingredients together will give you a lovely vanilla ice cream, but you can add whatever you want during the churning phase in order to change up the flavor however you like. For us today, I wanted to make a pumpkin spice ice cream to remind me that the heat of summer will eventually end and my favorite season, autumn, will soon be upon us, so I'm adding a bit of pumpkin pie syrup that I've had around my home for a while, because I need my fix, damn it. There are no specific measurements for the syrup, just because whatever you add to your ice cream is really just a matter of taste preference more than anything. So, let's get to making our frozen treat, shall we? To start with, you'll take a medium saucepan and put it over medium-low heat. You'll add in your milk, cream, half of the sugars, and whisk it all together, letting it heat until it just barely reaches a boil. That being said, you don't have to babysit this, so while that's still heating, you can go ahead and start making the custard part of the custard ice cream. For that, you will combine the egg yolks and the other half of your sugars with a hand mixer until it becomes paler and thickens a bit. Now, because we elected to use brown sugar, this is a little darker, but it should look something like this. So, once our cream mixture has reached a boil, you will add a third of that cream mixture into our custard and whisk it together. And then, once that's mixed in, you will add a second third of the cream mixture into the custard. And then, now I know you'd think that I would say add the remaining third, but no. We are instead adding the mixed cream and custard mixture back into the saucepan containing the remaining 1/3 of the cream mixture and adding the vanilla extract. You will then stir all of this with a wooden spoon over low heat, constantly stirring until it thickens enough to coat the back of your spoon. Also, be careful not to boil the mixture or you will overcook the egg yolks and your ice cream will not turn out right. So, after all that is done, it coats the back of your spoon, you will then take your mixture off the heat and let it sit until it hits room temperature. A lot of the ice cream making game is waiting, and we're going to go over a couple of reasons why you need to let it hit room temperature before you go to the next step. So, the reason you don't want to stick this mixture directly in the fridge while it's hot is that A, putting something that hot in your fridge has a good chance of potentially damaging the shelves of your fridge, and B, the heat can spread to other items in your fridge before it completely cools, meaning that some of your other foods can be put in what's known as the danger zone in food safety, which is a range of temperatures where bacteria and other foodborne nasties can propagate very quickly. But anyway, that's why we need to wait for our cream to hit room temperature. Speaking of, once it's hit room temperature, you will cover it and let it sit in the fridge for at least 2 hours. It can, however, sit as long as overnight. So, once 2 hours have passed, go get the bowl of your ice cream maker. The bowl for my machine needs to sit in the freezer before it can make ice cream. So I get best results from keeping it in my chest freezer than I do with the one on my fridge for my specific machine. Again, check what your machine needs in order to churn. You can make this with any machine, probably, but make sure you know how yours works. Some machines have built-in freezers. Mine does not. I need to pre-freeze the bowl before churning. So, take the cream mixture out of the fridge and pour it in to your machine after putting it all together and let the machine churn for at least 20 minutes. This is the point wherein you'd add any mix-ins you'd like, so here's where I'm adding my pumpkin pie syrup. Assuming everything is done right, it should look like ice cream already, if a bit soft, but you should put your ice cream into a container. My wife and I washed out an old gallon ice cream container for this purpose, and then you will let it sit in your freezer for a couple of hours. When you take it out of the freezer, let it sit 15 minutes before scooping. And there you have it, delicious custard-style ice cream, with, for us, a little autumn flair. So, I've made this ice cream many times. It always turns out fantastic. Now I know what you're wondering. Does this mean you'll never be buying another tub of ice cream ever again? I would say no. The ice cream is fantastic, but it requires an ice cream maker, which is not always cheap to get. If you can get secondhand, I definitely recommend it because it's worth it. But it's also pretty time and labor intensive to make. So, unless you have an ice cream maker and are willing to make an at least 4-hour commitment to make ice cream every time you want it, you're probably still going to be visiting the ice cream section of your local store every now and again. That being said, it is still some of the best ice cream I've ever had. So I definitely would recommend giving it a go. If you try this recipe for yourself, let me know how it turns out for you in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And that's it for this episode of Corvid Crunchies. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, at Corvid Communications, we won't leave you eating crow. Have a good evening.